Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we are discussing the penultimate episode of The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, All This and Timbuktu.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in All This and Timbuktu.
In the jungle, a young woman is swinging on a vine and Tarzan yelling. Upon landing, a lion starts to approach her, despite her telling him that it's not time for a test of strength. The time machine lands on a nearby cliff, and the gang see the lion forcing the girl to back onto a log. Fonzie leaps to the rescue.
Looks like trouble. Big trouble.
Landing on the log's other end, so the girl is shot up back into the trees. Once out of direct danger, the girl swings down on a vine to carry Fonzie to safety. She introduces herself as Shanti, and says she's on her way to Timbuktu. Cupcake reports that they're in Central Africa in the year 1100, where she plans to search for her missing father Kisho. Fonzie volunteers the gang to go with her. They quickly reach the city.
Timbuktu is the capital of our whole civilization.
Civilization? You hear that, Rich? We're saved! Malt shops, sock hops, television!
I don't think it's that kind of civilization, Ralph.
Where Mr. Cool bumps into an imposing-looking man and his guards. He and Fonzie are about to get into a fight, but Shanti diffuses the situation. This is Mabunta, her uncle. He refuses to tell her what happened to her father, unless she brings him the chest of wonders from the hidden city.
If you bring me the fabled chest of wonders from the hidden city, I will use its legendary powers to find your father.
Shanti decides to do it. Richie remarks to Fonzie that he doesn't trust Mabunta. Fonzie agrees, which is why he and Mr. Cool will go with Shanti, while Richie, Ralph, and Cupcake keep an eye on Mabunta.
Oh, abysmal asteroids! I never get to do anything!
In the jungle, Shanti tells Fonzie that no one knows where exactly the hidden city is, only that it was abandoned many years ago. Through slapstick, Mr. Cool discovers an ancient marker pointing the way to the hidden city.
Hey, congrats there, Cool. Looks like you found us a road sign.
Back in Timbuktu, Mabunta and his henchmen sail out on the river to follow Shanti and Fonzie. Richie, Ralph, and Cupcake try to sneak into Mabunta's building, with Cupcake zapping them into face-covering henchman uniforms, and they find the imprisoned Kisho. He's more annoyed than anything.
Another interruption? What is it this time?
As Timbuktu's leading astronomer, he's taking advantage of the isolation to work on his calculations. More henchmen show up, right as Cupcake's zap wears off and the uniforms vanish.
Meanwhile, back in the jungle,
Mr. Cool bumps into a gorilla and accidentally discovers the ruins of the hidden city. Shanti exposits that the hidden city was the capital of Timbuktu's empire, until someone misused the chest of wonders and destroyed it.
The chest did this? Yeah! I mean, that's a lot of horsepower for a little wood box.
The trio dodge one booby trap, and Fonzie sends Mr. Cool ahead to check for more traps. Mr. Cool almost immediately triggers one that causes the walls to start closing in on them. With a snap of his fingers, Fonzie causes a door to open, allowing the three of them to escape. Mr. Cool, once again by accident, finds the chest of wonders.
He seems to have found the chest of wonders.
In Timbuktu, the henchmen search Richie, Ralph, and Cupcake's pockets, and find an odd device belonging to Ralph.
And what might this be?
Oh, no! Oh, gee!
Richie begs them not to pull the string, though of course they do, and set off Ralph's smoke bomb. The trio escape, along with Kisho. The henchmen give chase, and Cupcake's attempt to zap them only puts the four escapees in chains.
You were supposed to slow them down, Cupcake, not us.
We have you now, strangers.
Meanwhile, Shanti, Fonzie, and Mr. Cool find the chest of wonders, and are then found by Mabunta and his henchmen. He orders Shanti and Fonzie seized.
Seize them and bring me the chest.
But they make quick work of the henchmen. Mabunta gets the chest and releases bolts of lightning, destroying the floor and sending Shanti, Fonzie, and Mr. Cool underground. He gloats that he was the one who imprisoned Shanti's father in order to trick her into finding the chest, and then snakes start to attack them. Back in Timbuktu, Richie, Ralph, Cupcake, and Kisho have been put in a small cell. Cupcake tries to zap them out, only to turn their chains into balloons and cause them to float up to the ceiling.
Whoa!
My telescope.
Kisho's telescope lens falls out of his robes, giving Richie an idea. Using the lens and some sunlight, he burns through the cell's wooden bars, and the four make their escape with the henchmen in pursuit. They end up at another dead end.
I've never seen a temple built entirely of dead ends before.
Through the window, they see Mabunta returning with the chest of wonders. Cupcake zaps up a suspension bridge from the window, allowing them to make their escape. Unfortunately, it's only half of a bridge, and the gang fall right into more henchmen's arms.
But now you're back
Back in the Hidden City, Shanti, Fonzie, and Mr. Cool try to climb up a massive statue to get back above ground, only for it to start to crumble. They manage to get away from the snakes and into the city's tunnels. Mabunta prepares to open the chest and destroy the gang, only for the lid to be stuck.
In a moment, you shall see the horrible fate that awaits anyone who disobeys Mabunta.
This gives Shanti, Fonzie, and Mr. Cool enough time to make it back to Timbuktu on an elephant. They take care of the henchmen. Then Fonzie opens the chest with a snap of his fingers. The power of the chest turns on Mabunta, sucking him inside.
No! No! Stop! Put me... No!
And then Shanti shuts the chest. Shanti thanks the gang for finding her father. And then Mr. Cool gets a concussion from swinging on a vine.
Yeah, that's my pooch. He'll never be much of a swinger, though.
Thank you, Peter. That was All This and Timbuktu. It first aired back on November 21st, 1981. The Fonz and the Happy Days gang was followed by a rerun of the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo show. CBS continued to air the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show, and NBC had a new episode of The Smurfs. This week, we learned the origin story of Smurfette. She was created by Gargamel as a spy, but was later turned into a real Smurf by Papa Smurf. So, Peter, of those choices, what are you watching?
Smurfette's secret origin, obviously.
I think that is a pivotal moment in 1980s pop culture.
I will send them a Smurfette!
All This in Timbuktu was directed by Ray Patterson, George Gordon, and Rudy Zamora. It was written by Diane Duane, and I think this was another example of Diane putting her own stamp on the show. As for cultural and historical references this week, this episode's title is a reference to All This and Heaven 2, a 1940 movie starring Bette Davis and based on a 1938 novel by Rachel Field.
I am going to tell you a true story. Perhaps I am wrong in telling it to you. For the most of our story, it will be a large and beautiful house. It is of the governess in this household, I will tell you.
The film tells the story of a governess who works for a duke and duchess.
The duke falls in love with the governess, murders the duchess, and then takes poison before he can be convicted.
The governess is then implicated in the murder of the duchess, but is ultimately exonerated.
The story was inspired by the life of Rachel Field's own great aunt. Our story this week takes place in Timbuktu in the 1100s.
We've landed in Central Africa about the year 1100.
The African city of Timbuktu, located in the West African nation of Mali, not central, as it says in this episode, was just then entering its golden age as a center of trade and a seat of learning. Timbuktu thrived for centuries and was one of the great civilizations of its time before various wars and invasions caused it to lose its importance. Peter, were you familiar with the history of Timbuktu at all?
I have heard Timbuktu a lot because people love to invoke it as a faraway place.
In fact, Timbuktu's fame spread throughout Europe in the Middle Ages. Europeans came to think of Timbuktu as a city of gold, unaware that gold was merely traded there instead of being mined there. Numerous explorers attempted to reach Timbuktu only to be killed by Africans. This added to the mystique of the city, and Timbuktu became synonymous with any place that was unreachable. We must acknowledge that this episode is heavily influenced by the Tarzan novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs and the numerous films based on those novels. Multiple characters in this episode, including Shanti and Mr. Cool, imitate the Tarzan yell made famous by actor Johnny Weissmuller in the 1930s. Fonzie says, "This looks like a job for the Fonz."
This looks like a job for the Fonz.
This is a variation on the famous line, "This looks like a job for Superman." Much like Up, Up, and Away, this phrase debuted in Superman's 1940s radio show.
This looks like a job for Superman.
That radio show was apparently very influential on the Superman mythos, Peter.
That radio show also introduced Jimmy Olsen.
Cupcake disguises herself, Ralph, and Richie as giant pieces of fruit.
Cupcake? A traveling fruit salad is not my idea of a disguise.
Ralph becomes a bunch of grapes, Richie a pear, and Cupcake an apple. This is a reference to a popular TV ad campaign for Fruit of the Loom underwear that ran in the 1970s and 80s. For years, the company's products were advertised by men in fruit costumes, very similar to these.
Look, up on the Fruit of the Loom briefs.
Is it a loose waistband?
A limp waistband?
No, it's our new super band.
And we've talked about these ads before for some reason. I think they've been brought up on Happy Days proper. And I believe they are now totally unknown to the public, that people have completely forgotten this ad campaign.
Sadly, yes. It's not as iconic as the "You Got Chocolate in My Peanut Butter" ad campaign.
Yeah, with Don Most.
Hey, you got chocolate on my peanut butter.
You got peanut butter in my chocolate.
Keisho describes himself as Timbuktu's leading astronomer.
As Timbuktu's leading astronomer, I must know what is in store for the stars and planets.
This is very accurate to the time and place. Timbuktu in its prime was a Muslim city, and the Muslims prized scientific knowledge, including knowledge of the stars and planets. In recent years, many scientific manuscripts from Timbuktu have been discovered and are currently being digitized and preserved.
Well, doesn't that make you feel dandy?
This entire episode is reminiscent of Steven Spielberg's smash hit film Raiders of the Lost Ark starring Harrison Ford. The Chest of Wonders, in particular, is very similar to the Ark of the Covenant in that film, and our heroes have to contend with various booby traps, just like Harrison Ford does. For the record, the Spielberg film was released in June 1981, roughly 5 months before this episode premiered.
A priceless treasure lies within anyone's grasp, but only one man knows where it is.
I did some research in some Hanna-Barbera fan groups to see what was the turnaround time on a half-hour Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and would it be possible for a 5-month-old movie to be referenced on one of their shows? And people have said it's just barely possible.
How can that be a bear down there?
It's barely possible.
I have no idea if the Chest of Wonders is something that actually comes from folklore, but watching this episode was a lot of, wow, this is very Ark of the Covenant. They've referenced Star Wars extensively in the past, so I think it does make perfect sense for them to reference Raiders of the Lost Ark, even if the turnaround time is just a smidge too close. There were probably trailers and such for Raiders of the Lost Ark even before the movie came out, so it's possible that even if they weren't influenced by the movie specifically, they could have just had the vague idea of what was going to go on in the movie. On the other hand, would the trailers have spoiled what the Ark of the Covenant can do?
I don't know, but the treatment of the Chest of Wonders in this episode is so similar to what happens to the Ark of the Covenant. It's this box that the villains want so badly, and then once they get it open, they wish they hadn't.
Nobody gets their faces melted, but Mabunta does get sucked in to the chest, presumably to spend the rest of eternity there.
Obviously, they can't have Mabunta's face melt off. That would be a little too intense for Saturday morning. But I thought, wasn't his fate maybe a little worse? Because now he's trapped in the Chest of Wonders, a hellish place that he cannot escape.
We don't know if the inside of the chest is hellish. Maybe it's a nice place.
Referring to the snakes, Fonzie says, we've got nothing to fear but them.
Hey, keep your fur on, cool. We got nothing to fear but them.
This is a variation on the famous quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," originally uttered by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during his first inauguration in 1933.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
And obviously snakes also play a huge role in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Elderly potheads. Why did it have to be elderly potheads?
Richie says a good scout is always prepared.
A good scout is always prepared, sir.
As we've mentioned on this podcast before, be prepared has been the motto of the Boy Scouts of America since 1907. Tom Lehrer has a whole song about the Boy Scouts and their famous creed and what he thinks of it.
Be prepared. That's the Boy Scouts marching song, be prepared.
I don't know on Happy Days proper if it was ever established that Richie had been a Boy Scout, was it?
Yes. In the episode Richie's Cup Runneth Over, Richie mentions that his only previous stag party was as a Boy Scout, and it involved a water bomb fight.
Fonzie says, there goes the neighborhood.
Come on, Shanti. There goes the neighborhood.
This is an ill-considered moment because that phrase is rooted in the racism of the 1950s and 60s. It was the lament of white homeowners when black families moved into their neighborhoods. Peter, were you familiar with that phrase?
Yeah. Ooh.
Shanti does the double thumbs up A.
Perfectamundo, you beautiful lady.
Hey!
Although this gesture is closely associated with the Fonz, Henry Winkler only did this a couple of times on Happy Days proper. I was amazed to see it on Fonz and the Happy Days gang and being done by someone other than Fonzie.
It was charming. It's always fun when characters borrow each other's catchphrases or mannerisms or whatnot.
Other observations this week, it's a great inversion of a cliche when Shanti swings in on a vine to save Fonzie from the lion, and then Fonzie lampshades it.
Hey, usually it's the Fonz that does the rescuing, not the other way around.
What did you think of that moment?
I'm glad that this close to the end, they were able to play with one last cliche. I don't think there's going to be a lot of that in the next episode, but who knows?
I don't know, but I think this was Diane Duane wanting a woman to be the one who swings in and saves Fonzie rather than the other way around. And speaking of lampshading cliches, after Cupcake checks her time band, Ralph says,
"Have you noticed she's always surprised when she checks that thing?"
Which I thought was a very funny moment. Ralph is aware of the cliches of the show.
It kind of reminded me of that one Onion article where the premise was that it was a column written by Ralph Malph where he wonders why he can hear invisible people laughing at him.
They're all gonna
In season 2, the characters often have to deal with Cupcake's magic wearing off. Was this a major problem in season 1? I don't remember it being that, but in season 2, it's in every episode.
I think it's there so that Cupcake's magic can be more useful while also still causing some problems so that the plot gets furthered. A lot of the episodes kind of feel a little bit too mean towards Cupcake, and I think that this strikes a nice balance between her powers being useful and her powers causing additional problems.
I always want Cupcake's success rate to be around 50% or 60%. I like that Keisho is so absorbed in his calculations that he doesn't want to be rescued.
That was a fun little piece of characterization. We've had kidnapped father figures before on this show, and I think this helped him feel more distinct.
Cupcake has a lot of catchphrases this week.
Trembling time warps, cosmic comets, creeping chronos, stellar spectacles, terrible time warps,
leaping logarithms, cosmic comets, moon craters twice, plus Ralph says it once, and galloping gravitrons.
Now, gravitrons are hypothetical particles that mediate gravitational interaction. We can't actually prove that they exist, but many physicists think that they do. Cupcake obviously knows about them. Time for a report on Mr. Cool this week. This was a very busy week for Mr. Cool. Were there times when he makes things better? Yes, sort of. He accidentally finds a marker that points to the hidden city. He somehow finds the hidden city itself, though I don't know if that is intentional. And he sort of finds the chest of wonders, though this is again accidental. Would you say that he intentionally does any of this?
They were trying to find the hidden city, and even if he stumbled upon them by accident, he was helping.
It's shake and bake, and I'll help.
Were there times that he makes things worse? Yes. When Fonzie dispatches him to look for traps, he immediately sets one off, trapping both Fonzie and Shanti. And while climbing the statue, dressed as an alpine mountaineer, and I like that touch, by the way, he manages to shatter one of its arms. And I don't know if this was just me, but I thought, wow, this is a giant 1,000-year-old statue. And Mr. Cool just broke off one of its arms. I thought that was a terrible thing because this would have been a very valuable artifact that should have been preserved for future generations, but he ruins it. Oh well. And were there times when Mr. Cool suffers physically and mentally? Oh yes.
He is briefly menaced by a lion and is left to dangle from a vine. He's tossed into a fountain. He nearly falls off a cliff.
He runs into a rock and crumples up his nose. A branch flings him into the side of a tree, and then an angry gorilla throws him like a football. A stone column falls on him when he trips a wire. He winds up with a huge lump on his head from that. His tail gets trapped between two brick walls.
He manages to pull himself free, but this launches him toward another brick wall. The high priest Mabunta lands on him, and after escaping the snakes, he is again thrown at a stone wall.
So, a really rough week for Mr. Cool. The animators now seem very fond of throwing him at walls. Do you find that stuff therapeutic when you see Mr. Cool thrown at something? Do you enjoy those moments?
They're kind of funny. I feel like we have mellowed out on Mr. Cool a lot over the course of the show, because initially we thought he was just worse than Satan, but over the course of the show he just suffers so much that you kind of can't hate him. He's not consistently doing bad things on purpose, so he is better than Chachi. He clears that low bar.
Limbo lower now. How low can you go?
So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in all this in Timbuktu?
Shanti wears a very stylish leopard print one-piece bathing suit type thing. I'm pretty sure that is not something that anyone would have worn in 12th century Timbuktu, but it is very stylish. That's probably another case of this being influenced more by Tarzan and Western ideas of what African history is like than actual historical accuracy. But I feel like that is probably to be expected on a Saturday morning cartoon from the 80s.
I would say it was very highly influenced by Tarzan and by Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Fortunately, I think some of the outfits that you see being worn by the people in Timbuktu are a little more historically accurate. I compared them against artwork from Africa from that era, and a lot of the outfits that we see that the people of Timbuktu wearing are not that far-fetched.
We actually do see some people in the city of Timbuktu that are not just main characters or the henchmen. They're very, very briefly there, but they are still there. So congratulations on not making another ghost town, the Fonz and the Happy Days gang.
They actually bothered to draw in some extras in the background, which is something we definitely do not get in many episodes of Fonz and the Happy Days gang season 2. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This episode was a lot of fun. Once again, I think Diane Duane is one of the best writers on this show. She's very good at playing with some of the cliches of the show. She definitely shows an interest in creating more active female characters who do need help from our heroes but aren't just damsels in distress. And even if there are some cliches about how Americans at the time viewed African history, there are some more attempts to be accurate. This episode is a lot of fun, and you don't necessarily need to feel weird about it.
Diane Duane has been one of the highlights of season 2 of this show for me. You can see that she is interested in a lot of aspects of world history and world culture, and I'm sure it was her idea to do an episode about Timbuktu in the 1100s because that was kind of an interesting era in Timbuktu's history when it was becoming this major center of trade and learning, and she wanted to make an episode about Timbuktu in its prime. So I'm glad that she got the opportunity to do that through the Fonz and the Happy Days gang. And I really like the character of Shanti because not only can Shanti take care of herself in a fight, she also has sort of a playful spirit while she's doing this. One thing that I've noticed about Fonzie through this whole series is that he tends to be successful in his fights because he treats it all as a game. Richie and Ralph get stressed out about everything and are always worrying and panicking. Fonzie always treats this as being fun and an adventure. And Shanti has that same sort of playful spirit that she brings to the action scenes. She doesn't get stressed out. She's able to have fun during the fight scenes. And that's why she's successful too. I like that they didn't write her as being grim and humorless just so that we would take her seriously. She's able to have fun with it just the way that Fonzie's able to have fun with it. I really like that Diane does her own thing with the show and doesn't necessarily have to follow the formulas. And in fact, she can make fun of the formula a little bit. So yeah, all this in Timbuktu was a very successful episode in my opinion. So Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at peterwolfrock.bsky.social.
They can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Well, the Happy Days gang have journeyed throughout history and the public domain. They've met everyone from King Arthur to Vikings. So, of course, in the series finale of the Fonz and the Happy Days gang, they are going to meet Sherlock Holmes.
I think that will be a very interesting episode, but I am sort of dreading it because it's the end of the series. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
How do you get to Timbuktu? Give me a map, give me a clue. What will I see and what will I do en route to Timbuktu? Timbuktu, if you didn't know, was a significant city many moons ago. Merchants and scholars settled here. The land was rich with salt and gold. Over the years, the desert moved in and the economy dried up. But still today, you can find a way